Hello everyone! So, I saw a very interesting video of Yaron Brook at the London Ayn Rand Meetup. And who did I hear in the audience? Somebody that I like to watch their YouTube channel. You know, Sargon of Akkad. I like a lot of his videos. I think he's a pretty smart guy and somebody I have some respect for and I enjoy listening to. And Yaron Brook as well, I know very well. So two people that I enjoy and respect as thinkers, although I am an objectivist like Yaron. However, I would like to make some comments on both of them, especially during the Q&A period. So there was just a period about 5 or 10 minutes in there. I'd like to go over what each of them said and make some, shall I say, improvements or corrections or clarifications on both sides. And I think I can... I think I felt compelled to do that. All right, so let's get going here. So in the Q&A on the video titled "The Evils of Corbyn's Socialism," Yaron Brook on the Sargon of Akkad live streams channel. We have at the 58-minute, 15-second mark. That's where Sargon comes in, and that's where I'd like to pick up. All right. So let's see. In my notes here, I have, doesn't think removing socialism is a politically feasible thing to do. Too many people are invested in things like the National Health Service. You will never get the political capital to make that happen. So, and here's the question Sargon puts to Yaron. He says, so is it worth divorcing the concept of socialism, social programs from socialism? Okay, this I have to respond to. By the way, you guys may have seen Vladimir Jaffe, the guy known as the former Soviet citizen. I love his, I enjoy his YouTube channel, and he often says this as well. We need to differentiate between socialism and social programs, and this is actually incorrect. This is not something you should be trying to do. Anyway, well, I'll explain why. So, let's see. Well, the core principle is the seizing of the means of production. That's what Sargon, or that's what they say. Says there's nothing anti-individualistic about something like universal health care. There's nothing that violates anyone's individual liberties in that regard. In fact, this is what Sargon says. In fact, for a lot of people, he continues, it is going to help them. And he says he doesn't see any problem with social programs as long as they aren't seizing someone's property. All right. When I heard that, I was like, okay, let's pull out the superpower brain here, because this is like very big error. All right. Everybody, Sargon, how are you going to have a so-called social program without seizing someone's property? What does this mean by a social program? Does a social program mean inviting a bunch of your friends over to your house to play a board game? Is that what we mean by social? Is it? No, that's not what we're talking about here. We're saying a social program. You're seizing someone's property. What about their money? Isn't that their property? That's like somebody's finances is so obviously someone's property. So what you're doing is you're under the threat of violence. The collective is saying to the individual, we're going to seize your property. If you don't, well, we're going to hurt you, etc., lock you up. And if you resist, we'll just kill you. Yeah, that's what we call a social program under that very nice sounding name. So no, that is... You are absolutely threatening to seize someone's property. So, you know, someone like myself, I don't see how anyone could not see through that so clearly. But you know, that's what I do. I see through stuff like that. Let's see. Gives example of the farms in Venezuela. So Sargon says, yeah, if you're seizing somebody's farms in Venezuela, then that's wrong. Well, what if you just seize someone's money to begin with? How are they ever going to buy a farm, to have a farm? So it doesn't even make... I mean, you can trace it through and give examples like that, but Yeah, you're obviously seizing someone's property. The interesting thing, though, is I was not happy with a lot of Yaron's responses, so I would like to see if I could improve upon them. So Yaron Brook responds, so let's think about, they aren't seizing anyone's property. He says that at 59 minutes, 58 seconds. That's a good response. And Yaron responds saying, but that is impossible. And he's correct there. Then Yaron goes on to talk about how the doctor's market is cornered by the socialized system. And this is where I think Yaron kind of goes off the trail here and probably not giving a very satisfying response to Sargon or the audience. And I think I can do a better here again. Yeah, so everything Yaron is saying about, if you have socialized education, socialized healthcare, it's true that you're making it very hard to compete for people who want to do it honestly and voluntarily trade with people, because the economic principle, you're just flooding a market with quote unquote free money. So it really destroys the competition. But this is not a really good point to be going on. This is not a justification or unjustification for it. This is just an economic explanation. The primary point is that the collective sees the property of the individual for the social programs. So I think you need to stick on that. And Yaron goes on to say, if we can never do away with NHS, then we've lost. And this is absolutely correct. I mean, if you cannot challenge the idea that if you cannot stand up for the principle of individual rights and a government protecting individual rights, and the fact that your life belongs to you, your property belongs to you, you've lost. You cannot go for the middle road. This is someone like Sargon, I guess, on his path to individualism. He's not an objectivist like Yaron and I. He's not quite there. But to him and to others in a similar place right now, I'd like to say, it's like saying a murderer. It's like saying, oh, well, if you only murder in moderation, then that's okay. But you've conceded the point that murder's okay. So you've lost. You've totally lost once you've done that. Once you've conceded, you've surrendered the point of individual rights. You've lost. And the reason why this will happen is for a lot of different reasons, and pretty much has to do with the lack of the philosophy of objectivism. If you don't get objectivism, if you have not accepted objectivism yet, then you're not going to be there. You're not going to get this. And it's the job of people like Yaron and other objectivists like myself to try to get you there. The other people that consider themselves individualists and defenders of Western civilization. We're fighting for Western civilization here, okay? And this is very, very doable. But you have to understand philosophy correctly. You have to get to a point where you're an objectivist. If you can't do that, then we've lost, because Ayn Rand, she was the culmination of Western civilization. She's the person that figured out the moral foundation for that. And without that, you just revert. You cannot sustain Western civilization. You cannot continue to progress in that direction. You will actually go in the opposite direction, which is exactly what's happening in the world today. So it's unsustainable to have Western civilization without objectivism being the dominant philosophy of the 21st century. If we can't get there, then game over. Okay, so that's why I'm here. That's why I'm Aristotle of America. That's the name I picked because Aristotle is the basis for Western civilization, and I'm fighting for that. So I'm going to continue here. We're about at the 9.5 mark. I'm trying to keep this maybe under 15 minutes. We'll see how long. I don't want to get this going too long here. But Yaron goes on to say he says we can never get rid of the NHS. He explains how 48% of medicine is still private, and he goes on and talks about how the U.S. is subsidizing the rest of the world through R&D. That's why we pay so much here, because the rest of the world is paying cost. Yeah, all that's true. Probably not very satisfying. as a response, though. That's good information. But someone like Sargon's he needs more philosophy here. So, all right. So let's see what I can do. Sargon goes on to say that he doesn't think anyone is against the idea of paying taxes. All right. Well, I can respond to that. I don't want to derail things here, but if Sargon's going to get to the point of being objectivist, or his viewers being objectivists, this is an excellent opportunity to challenge that. Yes, absolutely. In a free society, in a capitalist society, and ultimately in Western civilization, and as it is sustainable and defendable, you do not have, quote unquote, what we refer to as taxes. Okay, if taxes mean coercively funding the quote unquote government or the body politic. If that's what you mean by taxes, then no, a free society does not have taxes. A free society has government and it funds the government, but it doesn't do it through coercion. So yeah, and well, yes, if you believe in government, individual rights, and capitalism, you are against the idea of paying taxes if taxes mean all of that, and the monopoly on force coercing you under the threat of violence. And as Yaron says, particularly if those funds are going towards what I would call anti-government activities, which will then further violate the rights of others. So I actually think this is very helpful to think about. I'm going to introduce the term anti-government. It's probably going to be different than the way other people have used it. The way I use the term anti-government, which I think keeps people's thinking very clear, is anti-government is when the monopoly on the use of force, the body politic, the state, whatever you want to call it, when they are in principle acting most likely by the request of the society, but regardless, for the purpose of violating individual rights rather than protecting individual rights, that's called an anti-government. And if you have any system other than capitalism, or a system that's not limited to the protection of individual rights, you have an anti-government. So taxes collecting taxes, which coercive funding, that is an anti-government activity right there. So burn that term into your head, this concept of government and anti-government. Anti-government, I suggest you don't use that term to opposing any arbitrary body politic, which is a fairly unhelpful term. I would actually use it to describe the body politic. And you have two forms of body politic, one that protects individual rights and one that violates individual rights. And use the term anti-government for the latter, the one that violates individual rights, in principle and intentionally. I'm not talking about accidentally. But, all right, so then move on. So yes, a person would be against the idea of taxes. If, however, taxes merely mean funding the government, blah, 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 oh, no. So in the case of funding, it is a relatively minor issue, but it can be done ethically and must be done without engaging in anti-government behavior. And that actually can be done fairly easily in a capitalist society, meaning a society where the government is limited to the protection of individual rights. It's really not a lot of money. Yeah, today the quote-unquote government we have, you could never fund all of that financing voluntarily because it's way more money than anyone would be willing to pay. It's not justifiable. So yes, you do have to threaten people with violence and murder in order to collect that much financing. But anyway, how you get there is a slightly different topic for another day. So Yaron goes on to say that the government should only do the things. Here, this is probably not very satisfying for Sargon and other people. Yaron goes on to saying that the government should only do the things that only the government can do. This really isn't the best argument, as I explained. The government should only do what is morally right to do, and by that's protecting individual rights. That's what a government is. So this isn't just some matter of convenience. If you just say, oh, well, you can do that voluntarily, so we shouldn't have the government do it. That's one way of explaining it, but that's not in any way a justification to have people really understand. So I don't think that was the strongest response that Yaron gave there. And Sargon, he needs a lot of these subtleties, as he said. He said there's lacking subtleties, and there's a lot of back and forth that I think needs to go on for someone like Sargon and other people, other individualists, to get this. whether it's Jordan Peterson and other people. So force should only be used to protect rights, never to coerce people to violate rights. And if the government does that, it is really engaging in anti-government behavior. So Sargon says, yes, this is force, but everything the government does is force. Okay, yes. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, he maybe have understood more in this, but that wasn't a very precise statement there, because sure, that's true. Everything the government does is force, but there's a huge difference between using force to protect individual rights and retaliate against people, and using force to violate people's rights. So he may have realized that, but that was a, I mean, that might have been an equivocation he let sneak in there, but that was a very that was pretty not a very good statement Sargon made there, because I go on to clarify. So also, unless you understand, so here's the thing. People don't necessarily think force is bad, and Sargon, he's not an objectivist yet, so I would assume that he doesn't necessarily think force is bad. Some libertarians do, but they have a different problem because they don't have any real justification for why force is bad, not any legitimate justification like Ayn Rand did. Here's the legitimate justification, okay? Although it gets much more detailed in this, but the basic idea is you have to understand the morality, the sort of thing. You have to understand what Ayn Rand introduced, because here's the thing: libertarians come along and they just say, "Well, that's wrong because you're initiating force." Yeah, so who cares? Lots of people believe initiating force is fine. Maybe in their personal lives they don't believe it's fine most of the time, but if there's a big enough collective, they certainly believe initiating force is fine. And what they do is they ask for the state to initiate force and engage in anti-government behaviors on their behalf to violate people's rights. So people do not believe initiating force is wrong, libertarians, and I don't think Sargon is one of those hardcore libertarians. But that's to say what's wrong with the libertarians. But here's where Ayn Rand. Let me see if I can give you a taste of what Ayn Rand does here instead. So Ayn Rand, she explains that in order to have human flourishing, our power as a human being is the power of reason. It's our thinking minds, okay? In order to use reason, you cannot be coerced. That's the stopping force. You can have violence used against us. So basically, I mean, there's so many ways to explain this, but basically you try to use coercive force for some net greater effect. You're essentially trying to use evil to create good, and it's impossible. You cannot use evil to create good. The powerhouse of human beings to live and thrive is reason. That is the most powerful thing. When you abandon the principle that it's morally good that people should be free to use that ability, you've thrown away the most valuable thing we have to try to create a shortcut for, quote, the greater good, or whatever you want to call evil. You notice people call evil the greater good. There's no such thing as greater than good. It's evil. That's what it's called. But so this is where Ayn Rand and libertarians different. Ayn Rand gave the moral justification and explanation of rights, why coercive force is bad. So you're probably going to need to talk to an objectivist some more and hear some more explanations. It took me a very long time of studying just all the content from the Ayn Rand Institute, watching Ayn Rand Institute videos for years to become an objectivist and understand this. So anyway, so Yaron goes on. So he says government should only do what it can do. This is more of an economic justification. So at 1 hour 6 minutes, Sargon says, that seems to be jumping steps because nobody is forcing doctors to work. That's true. I mean, under the system today, in the UK, I don't think no one's forcing doctors to work. And this is actually what a lot of people say. You know, you might hear somebody like a Peter Schiff, or someone else will say, you know, if you have a right to medical care, that means you have a right to force the doctor. You have the right to hold a gun to his head and treat you. Well, that's true, but that's not how the system's working today. Actually, how the system working today is they hold a gun to people's head to get the money to pay the doctor. So they use coercive force there. Now, if you believe that's okay, then in principle, there's nothing wrong with doing the same to a doctor, having the state do that. And, you know, I'm sure there have been socialist to communist states that have done that. However, so people's property is stolen to pay the doctors who work voluntarily. This is done at the request of the society, the collectivists. So the anti-government will do that. Yeah, okay. So then at 1 hour 7 minutes, Sargon says, but doesn't that illegitimize any kind of government regulation? And the correct answer, So yes, it does. All government regulation, depending on how you define regulation, is illegitimate. So if you define regulation as we're going to violate someone's rights now in order to prevent, there's a couple things, maybe the violation of rights in the future, or just for a better outcome or greater good in the future, then yeah, regulations just means we're going to violate rights now with the promise that it will have some net benefit or benefit in the future. If that's all regulation means, then yes, all regulations are illegitimate, because that's an anti-government behavior right there. That's not consistent with Western civilization. That's not consistent with reason. That's not consistent with the principle of government, individual rights, freedom. It's not consistent with any of that, if that's the definition of regulation. And sometimes, you know, you might hear someone like Yaron slip and use the term regulation slightly different for some unique cases involving minors or involving firearms or certain situations, but that's sort of a slightly different use of the term regulation, and it's a somewhat sloppy use of the term in order to get to use a word that people are familiar with. So Sargon says he finds this unnuanced, what Yaron is telling him, and I somewhat feel like I somewhat feel like Yaron is lacking as well, which is why I'm trying to explain this for Sargon and other people. And it's probably easier to have it back and forth, but I want to get this video out here. I thought it was a good visit, but Sargon's someone who I think does a lot of good work. But as an objectivist, I've decided I'm going to start getting my voice out there. I've started my channel, Aristotle of America. I know it kind of sounds like Sargon's thing a bit, but I was trying to come up with something with Aristotle in it. And yeah, so in America is anyway, so I think that's a good title to work with. So I tried to go fast. Maybe it sounded a little frantic, but I was trying to keep high energy. We'll see how it plays out in the future. I gotta wrap this up. I'm gonna say cut, and thank you. Please subscribe to the channel. I'm working on this. I'm just getting used to talking publicly and working off notes and stuff, so I'm only going to get better. Please subscribe. Please like the video. I think I'm going to leave comments up. Yeah. Enjoy.